All right, we're here. This is a unusual thing for one of my live streams. I'm just starting right off with Sam. Look at this. And I don't know how much we'll cover because a lot of these things you could go into pretty deep detail. I think I tried to lay out in my description the things I kind of wanted to cover. Two things first, though. Two things before we dive into Christology and your conversation with David Bentley Hart. I just rage baited myself and I watched a conversation, a little clip between Francis Chan and Gavin Ortlund. Good grief. It's
What
terrible.
what was terrible about it? Because generally I like Francis Chan.
I
And
do like
suspect you do. I
I like
suspect
Francis
you
Chan
do.
too, but that's because he's humble about his own intelligence. That's a
Yes.
huge reason.
Yes.
Very humble about his own intelligence. And he realizes what he's good at and what he's not good at.
Are you
And
saying Gavin is not humble about his own intelligence? Is that the implication here?
I here's the thing. I don't really know Gavin that well, but because of conversations with you, like there are so many assumptions of things that he lays out because he says why he's still Protestant. He's comparing it to Catholics and Orthodox, and he says like we don't even know if they believe the Bible, and they have systemic differences in what we believe. And he's talking about sola scriptura, and I'm just like, you're not even. What do you mean by believing the gospel? Like he is engaged in the Jordan Peterson phenomenon of what belief is. Zero. Like he clearly has no understanding about any of that stuff, but yet he's trying to convert people to like what I would say seems to me like a very modernist, rationalist, propositional, focused understanding of evangelicalism. This isn't to say there isn't strengths in Protestantism.
I'm not even sure if he's trying to convert people so much as keep people inside the fence who are already there. I think that
Oh, he
he's
says explicitly in there he wants to convert people.
well, fair enough. But I think that his main goal is um, prevention of deconversion, rather more so than conversion.
Which is maybe fine. Yeah, I would agree with that. Like
Mm-hmm.
deeply go into your own tradition and ask a few questions. I mean, the problem is that, and now it's a little bit easier, I think, because of the advent of the internet, is that churches are having to engage in these kinds of conversations. Whereas before they could just kind of cover their eyes and ears and just tell people not to look into certain things. You can't really do that anymore, but whatever. That dude. Whew. And then Francis Chan is just like, oh man, yeah, that's so great. You're so smart. You're so good at this. And I'm just like, no, he's not. Drives me crazy. Anyhow, all right. The framing of the Christology thing. This is so like, in light of what I just said, seeking greater understanding rather than just entrenching ourselves in our previously held beliefs. I want to frame it this way. I just finished this morning the Paul Antliler conversation with Jordan Hall and Rafe Kelley, and it is really good, especially the tail end of it. It gets very personal, very pastoral.
I only got halfway through that so far, but yeah, it's good, and I assume that it gets more personal. Rafe Kelley only goes in one direction,
Yeah,
and
and
it
it's the
is
right one.
personal and often involves tears.
Yes.
And he's heading in that trajectory. I can tell.
Yeah, it's really great. And we were talking about this a little bit in a chat this morning, which you probably didn't have time because you're doing kid stuff. But Paul Antliler makes this comment, which I'll probably pull up because I posted it on X, that is about Kierkegaard's idea of paradox resolving in the self versus what David Bentley Hart, I think, was talking about regarding logical paradox as it relates to Christology. So that's a point that I'm going to want to bring up and talk a little bit about. But also the bigger frame that I want to put this whole thing in for you and me is like, and this is what a local buddy I got together at a happy hour last night talked about, a guy in my local estuary. And it's essentially this is like, why does it matter? Like the difference between the way that you and I would even understand the Trinity, or differences in Christology and Chalcedonian formulations, and even David Bentley Hart and Jordan Daniel Wood. Why do these things matter? And I actually would say, as that relates to what is belief, and lived holiness, lived conformity to Christ. Like why does it matter what we think about these things? What do you think? Let's start there.
This is one of those things that I've gone back and forth on a lot in my life, because there's been many times where I feel like there's a theological disagreement without any practical consequence. And
Is there such a thing?
what?
Is there such a thing?
Is there such a thing? Or at least it certainly can seem. I've certainly been in situations that felt like there was. But at the end of the day, it was like, but what's the difference if you say this and I say this, and we both agree that we're just trying to follow Jesus, and we actually generally agree about how one does that and how one should get better at doing that, and what are these abstractions really for? And yeah, I can talk about the abstractions, and I have an opinion, and I'm not going to kowtow my opinion to what someone says my opinion should be just because they're saying it. But at the end of the day, what's the real practical consequence? A lot of times I feel that way, which is why I think that's one of the things that you and I have kind of agreed on in general, is that a lot of disagreement is fake, and that
Can we meaningfully disagree and be friends?
yeah, and that's it's a good question. That's a very Luke question, and I think I understand the purpose of the question. And but then there are some times where it doesn't feel that way. There are times where it feels real, and times where it feels like it matters. So I don't know. I mean, it really, like Gavin can really insist, for example, and I've interacted with him more than you have, and I've had some amount of personal interaction with him, although I will not, I don't try and spill beans on private conversations or stuff like that. But
That's my job.
I what?
That's my job.
That's your
I'm
job.
just
But
I'm
no,
just kidding. It's a good thing to
even
do.
in public, like right in public, he will say, we worship Jesus, we worship the Trinity, and if you're not worshiping the Trinity, then you're not worshiping the true God, and you're not a Christian, and that's why the Trinity is a first order matter, right? And honestly, he seems to have been looking for and finding reasons why the Trinity should be a first order doctrine, since I kind of pointed out that he didn't have any good reason why it was.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, if you suddenly start making your church services all we worship Jesus, and if you can't worship Jesus, you're not going to enjoy or be able to participate in this thing. Well, suddenly that does start to feel like a real difference, and the abstract has been forced into the practical in a weird kind of way.
Yeah. Well, and so what I would add to that is I would say what's funny is, like, at the propositional level, I agree with Gavin. And I do think it is a foundational thing.
Mm-hmm.
I just would add in the Peter Rollins thing, is that we don't know what we really believe.
Mm-hmm.
We're working that out. That's part of working out our own salvation with fear and trembling. This is why I talk about egoic knowledge. We have an egoic understanding of what we think we believe, where we attach our identity to our consciously aware propositions.
Mm-hmm.
But is that what you really believe? Well, I don't know. That's why we go to psychotherapy. That's why we go to therapists. That's why do I do the things that I do, the things I don't want to do, and the things that I don't want to do, I find myself continually doing. Oh, wretched man that I am. We are not integrated. And that probably goes to why I'm not an anti-propositionalist, because I do think these things matter. I don't think things happen. I would bring in kind of Charles Williams' book, The Descent of the Dove, that the whole purpose of the church is reconciliation. So that every time that there are these schisms and these bad things that happen and these falls, both like cosmically, big picture, and fractally, all these different falls, selling Joseph into slavery, Jacob and Esau schisming, all these bad things that happen. The point of that is, if in my frame, the whole point of creation is to be like God, and that means becoming one who forgives, then all these falls are necessary. They're absolutely necessary, because those are the training seeds that's the soil that turns us into the kind of people that we're meant to be, which is like God, one who forgives his enemies.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't get that without even
I'm sorry,
intellectually.
where did God forgive his enemies?
Where did God forgive his enemies?
I remember Jesus doing that. I'm still trying to remember where.
Well, I mean, what isn't that the verse that, like, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us? But like that's on the behest of God, however you want to frame it, even as his emissary. And so, and being, the exact imprint of his nature, the icon of God thing. I get your equivocation on God and God as, adjective versus noun. Listen, I'm a monarchical.
Because in a certain sense, God doesn't have enemies. You can be an enemy of God, but God doesn't have an enemy, I think is.
No, and like, yeah, that's the Avett Brothers song. Like, I have no enemies. That whole, like, their big song, which is like that refrain at the end, is when you forgive people, yeah, you don't have enemies anymore. Even if they're living in opposition to you, and that therein is the grace that woos them, And so
I remember when the Avett Brothers used to be good.
They're not anymore?
I don't think so. But yeah,
I liked some of their last album, the first song of their last album, at least.
Folk rock. That's another thing that's been on the text chain a lot recently, is you guys just nostalgia, nerding out about Nickel Creek and stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I was just a little bit too young for that. And I was listening to real bluegrass, like actual bluegrass. Doc Watson is my thing. Anyway, David Bentley Hart. I was at a friend's house last night, a corner friend who likes to be private, so I won't say his name, but we were talking a lot about the David Bentley Hart conversation. One thing that I think, I think it's hard to realize how radical what David Bentley Hart's proposing really is.
Tell us.
I don't think a lot of people really notice what he's actually saying. And I was trying to get him to be a little bit less coy and a little bit more upfront about what he actually thinks, but he didn't sort of do that. I don't know. It was, what did you think of my conversation with David Bentley Hart?
So I thought it was great. There were I need to re-listen to it again, but I've just had too many other things going on to re-listen to things. But there were some points where I remember a few specific points where you were kind of doing your Sam thing, which you're great at, which is reformulating what someone has said in your own voice, and then them just being like, yeah. But there were a couple points where he was like, no, that's not what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. Which, was helpful. I can't even remember the specifics of what you guys were talking about at that time.
I think the where was Jesus 5 minutes before he was conceived question.
Which is one of the things that I want to get into, because he dropped in that little thing is like, time is a creature. And that's like a drum that I'm beating on constantly. And why I love Maximus is because linear time, like before Jesus, like there isn't, in a sense, like there's no, that doesn't really make sense for me. It only makes sense for me as an abstraction, actually. Because I really do, I really don't think it's just a figure of speech that Maximus says Jesus is creating the world from the cross.
Yes.
Like, I think he means that, actually.
And I mean that, right? That's one of the things that I like. I can find a lot to agree about with Maximus. I can't go obviously the full 9 yards with Maximus, but I like Maximus the Confessor a lot. Because in many ways he was persecuted for defending the humanity of Jesus. That's really Maximus's story. And another thing that's interesting about Maximus the Confessor is like this, he brings up all sorts of questions related to truth and authority that I think are interesting as it relates to sort of even Protestantism and orthodoxy and clerical authority and stuff like that. Because Maximus the Confessor, during his lifetime, was told by his priests, his bishop, that he was a heretic and that he should repent. He was told by the emperor that he was a heretic and he should repent. There was a church council that was gathered that decided while he was alive that he was a heretic and that he should repent. And then he had his tongue tongue cut off and his thumbs cut off so he couldn't write or speak, and was thrown in prison and then died, maybe not that long after that from sort of, the torture and his wounds and stuff like that. So by all appearances, the church, as unanimously as it possibly could, said that he was wrong during his lifetime. And then after his death, there were church councils that said that he was right, and that what he was saying was the truth. So was Maximus the Confessor right because a church council would come after his death and tell him that he was right? Or was he right because he had somehow direct access to the truth as an individual? Because he is almost Luther-like in the here I stand, here I stand, you cough my tongue, I can do no other, right? Sort of thing. So anyway, I think, and then he's like a saint, and not just like a saint, he's like a super saint. And so it brings up all sorts of questions around authority and all that sort of thing. And really the thing that he was defending is that Jesus had a human soul and a human will.
Yeah, right. So two things come to mind that I want to go from there. First, as it relates to authority, because that was one of the things that I wanted to talk about with you, and how I've often said that you can't root authority in a text. It's rooted in persons. But even in the case of Maximus, right, it's his priest, his bishop, like that's personal authority. But there are many dynamics of that. And so like, and you said, I don't even know that David Bentley Hart likes that kind of authority, because he basically said in there, like, he doesn't like...
he's grown increasingly untrusting or unrespectful of any kind of claim to authority, I think is what he said. Something straight like that. I'm like,
and I like that, because like even in the Maximus case, I mean, that's the American in me, that's the individualistic American in me. And here I stand, I can do no other, that very Protestant inheritance. And our revolt against monarchical tyranny, in England. And so I love all that stuff. But then I don't, this is what I would say, is that when the church, and I may have left a comment like that, when the church wants to make its own proclamations a kind of static held authority, they are treating the church as if, like, if you're just saying this is what the church says, in the way that I think Catholics do with the magisterium, like this is what the church says, that to me is the exact same spirit that Protestants do with sola scriptura. It's just applied to a different thing. And I would say, as an Orthodox Christian, I don't believe the Orthodox Church does that, or they should not do that.
But I wonder if Maximus the Confessor believed in sola scriptura or something like that, because I think part of the reason why I thought he was right, at least in part, was his interpretation of scripture and how he understood it.
Well, I don't know that he would have rooted it in, see, something like sola scriptura. I just think, I don't know that thing really emerged in the evolution of consciousness until after Gutenberg, although there were seeds of it before, obviously. But like there was, here, I want to pull up that quote, because I think it's related to this, of Kierkegaard, that Paul Antleitner said. So here we go. I'm going to share the screen. And then there's some people have some questions too that I want to get to, because it's related. So can we see this?
Yep.
So in their little talk, he said, this is Paul Antleitner giving us Kierkegaard on paradox. And he says, finding the authentic self is the synthesis of the finite with the infinite. The only doorway is stepping into the paradox, because paradoxes can only be resolved from within. And the doorway in to the within, to the, the inward self, is the measure of faith. Not blind faith in propositions, but what we're doing now in the kind of dialogos he was talking about. And interestingly, that quote is directly related. Another corner thing that I highly recommend is Karen Wong had Ian McGilchrist on with Dr. Chrissy Green. And that's like, that quote is basically what their whole conversation is about.
And that quote reminded me, speaking of Maximi, there was Bishop Maximus, the living Bishop Maximus, who talked with John Vervaeke recently.
Yep.
And that quote that you just read reminded me a lot of what Bishop Maximus, because I think, were they in Alexandria, or where were they? They were in some exotic location. on John's Silk Road project, and Bishop Maximus basically made a presentation that basically at the root of all epistemology is faith, and faith as like a personal embrace of, you know, knowing itself and things like that.
Right.
And he used Clement of Alexandria and other things like that. And so like that sort of quote, yes, I like that sort of quote. There are certain kinds of paradoxes that I think David Bentley Hart and I do not enjoy, where they are sheer propositional paradoxes that are being forced on people. And it's like, are you sure this is like a paradox, or did you just kind of get something wrong and you're kind of trying to cover your tracks?
Okay. Well, that's the kind of logical paradox that I think when David Bentley Hart, that quote that I liked where I clipped him, is he was saying the Christology, the two nature things, if you're putting that, if you're trying to draw lines in like a dichotomy, you're not understanding it. That's the kind of paradox that he's talking about, because the paradox is resolved in the person.
Yeah.
Like Jesus is the unity of it, which is when he also said that any metaphysic worth its salt is monistic, because it's monistic in the person. The person is the monad that brings the seeming opposites together into the one, which is also related to the Patristic Ordo quote or part that I want to talk about, which is, this is my local deacon friend, which he always said, the Patristic Ordo has to do with the Orthodox way of reasoning. And it's always that you start with the person and then you reason to nature and then you reason to characteristics. Whereas I think in the West, people often try to do the inverse.
Yeah. Nature's our characteristics first or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like first principles. No. First persons.
Well, you know, Origin once wrote a book called First Principles. Although that's actually not even quite exactly the right translation. It's Archon, like about the archy, about the source of things or something, you know, about
which to me would probably be angelic hierarchies, which would be persons.
Yeah. Or another way, I think you could call it on the fundamentals. I think that would actually be a hilarious translation.
Yeah.
Is really archy does mean something like the fundamental or something like that. Yeah.
So two things. I want to answer this one question and get back to some of the exact points that you talked about with David Bentley Hart. A lot of people have been talking about that we need to bring in some Chardin, and
I tried to read Chardin once, but I think I was too young. I was like 19 or 20 when I tried to read him, when I was first sort of wrestling with evolution and Christian questions, and I was told that, oh, you know, he talks a lot about evolution and Christianity, and I read him, I was like, what the heck is this? I think one has to like be deep into phenomenological philosophical terminology to understand what he's talking about. And at that age and stage of my development, I did not. So I did not make it very far.
There was someone who had a comment in there who brought up, or they asked me in one of my comments on your video, if I thought, you know, Chardin resolved some of these things. And I was like, I have not read him. But Jedediah, I've been communicating with Jedediah. And, oh, Sam's distracted by children. But
I'm not distracted by children. I'm trying to see if I have Chardin on my bookshelf.
Oh.
You keep talking.
But Jedediah is, perhaps he said he might be able to make some time, and we dropped a link to come in here and talk about it, because I know he knows a lot about Chardin. So, but there is, let's go to, I don't know if you remember this, but Ryan asks that he thought David Bentley Hart surprised you at the end. Do you remember being surprised?
I was a little surprised, because so there was at one of the Q&As in the lecture series that created this book, right? So David Bentley Hart has a book, but first it was a series of 5 lectures at Cambridge, right? And he basically turned his lecture notes into a book. And so in one of the Q&A sessions at one of the lectures that was the source material for the book, someone asked him basically the question, so you're really not saying that God became man, you're saying that man became God. And he said something like, you know, God became man, of course it's in the creeds, of course it's traditional language, but yes, you're right, it's basically a shorthand because God can't become anything, God can't change. And so it's really a shorthand way of saying that man became God. And of course, it's perfectly good language because it's creedal and traditional, but don't misunderstand what it actually means.
Could you say this? God became man. God became man in man. Like what George MacDonald says is like, we are God's becoming.
Yes. And I think that that is more what he was trying to say. Like my basic take on David Bentley Hart is that he's basically a transcendentalist. Him and Emerson basically would find little to disagree about.
That's a good thing, right? Because that's what you call
Right.
me.
Yeah. Like if you think it's crazy that I think at the opening quote in the whole book is from Ralph Waldo Emerson, and he gives it a full-throated endorsement. So like, I don't think I'm coming completely out of left field by saying that. And I think that in many ways, the Christology in this book is not inside the bounds of orthodoxy. And that it really more resembles a Unitarian kind of Christology, even although not one that even I would fully endorse. But he does have a conception of the Trinity, and he leans very heavily into Bulgakov for his conception of the Trinity. But I also don't think it's an Orthodox Trinitarianism either. There's a triad of a sort, and he would certainly call himself a Trinitarian, and I think he would be upset to be accused of not being an Orthodox Trinitarian, because I think he thinks he is and thinks he's trying to be. But I think that this theology is so outside the box.
Tell us why specifically.
All right. I mean, I think his basic theology is something like this, that I think he is a pantheist, really. Like, not even just panentheism. I think he just kind of is a pantheist, although he still has some gap between what things are and what things are supposed to be in the end. So he's like some sort of progressive developmental pantheist, where God, and he says this as explicitly as he can, that there is no personality that's God. There is no psychological self or person. And I think that I think Nate kind of said something. I think it was Nate said something like that in the chat earlier.
Let me find it.
Is that he doesn't really have a sense of personhood, or at least not one that Nate finds satisfactory. And I think that I think Nate is probably right, that there is no person God, that God is like the whole show, the monad, and that there's kind of two senses of what God is. There's God that is sort of the wellspring of potential and existence, right? The kind of just the sheer active being that brings everything up, like, the fountainhead of all potentiality and being itself. And I kind of think of this as the bottom of God. And then there is like the light at the end of the tunnel God, which is what everything is moving towards. And this is like the final purpose, the telos, the final cause, the perfect vision of creation once it's all done. And so the bubbling up is causing things to move towards the end. I kind of think of it, there's like the beginning of the tunnel and the light at the end of the tunnel, and we got to go through the tunnel. And like this whole thing is God, but God is not a person. God is not a personality. God has no self-consciousness or psyche or anything like that, except there are these, and I don't exactly quite understand where these things come from, but there are souls, right? There are persons inside the show. And the goal of a person is to become, fully divine or fully in touch and perfect and manifesting of the true nature of reality or creation. And like, finally reach that end at the end of the tunnel. And then you sort of that is when God has a personality. Is God doesn't have a personality or self-consciousness or a soul until a person inside the show has perfected themselves and become like God. And the eye with which I see God is the eye with which God sees me, like that sort of that kind of inside the show divinization. And his Trinity, to the extent that he has one, like the whole show is God the Father, but again, God the Father isn't self-conscious or anything like that. And then a person inside the show is, or like an individual thingamajigger is the Son. And then there's the connection between the two, which is the Holy Spirit. I feel like that's a little ad hoc. I'm not quite sure what the connection between the two is, or if one even needs a connection, or if one, I think he's just sort of given a job to the Holy Spirit because he knows that he has to. But and that the goal is sort of for creation to wake up to its own divine nature, and that is God becomes man, man becomes God, and then that's sort of the purpose of the whole thing. I think that that's really sort of his, I don't know, his theology, his cosmology, whatever you want to call it. And that, yeah.
So I'll probably, I don't know when we should drop the link, because there's people in here who probably could have some great things to add, but I will respond to that and give some of my thoughts. I think that I don't really see God the Father as Arenic, like he's the whole thing.
Right.
I really do think that God the Father is beyond all of those kinds of categorical distinctions. And in that sense, like the clearest analogous thing is, you could say, like, the ground, the fountainhead from which anything emerges, he exists in, pure light or whatever. It's almost like the way that I conceive of it, why I like this idea of the, that torus, this thing that is, I'll add that in a little bit.
Yeah,
Like
sure,
the
go for
torus, that's like you could almost think about it cosmologically, like the singularity or a black hole at the center of any universe from which everything emanates. But I think all of those are interconnected in ways that we can understand through wormholes. And so, like, every person is like that, of how, like, even inside you is a universe, that self where the paradox resolves, like the receive with meekness, the implanted word is like the singularity at the core of your being from which everything emanates, but they're all fractally relocated, where it's like, it's almost like the magician's nephew, and like that realm they go in the wooded forest where there are pools and they open up into different worlds. Like those are like the singularities at the core of every person. And like none of those things exactly, you could almost say that like the cosmic Christ, Jesus is the cosmic Christ, is the entirety of those things. Like we say in the liturgy, Christ the only existent one. And then fractally, we are all that in our own way. But is that related to somewhat of what Adam liked with when David Bentley Hart, and can you walk us through the grammar, I guess, of this? Maybe this will tie things in, of when he was talking about that we are the same genus as the genus of the Father.
Yes. I think that is that our ability to be microcosms of the macrocosm is what he means that we are the genus of the Father. Because we can.
I've never understood that arbitrary distinction. Like even energy essence stuff to me seems to me to like try to lean into to difference rather than unity. It seems to me to be a false.
And Hart does not like essence energy distinctions, because he doesn't like any kind of dualism, right? And he feels like that smacks of dualism, and it makes God in his truest sense inaccessible
to other. And to me, it's a bastardization of the incarnation.
Right. And I think Hart would absolutely agree with that, because it's basically saying that you're only getting some created version of Jesus when you look at him, as opposed to full God in himselfness.
So do you think David Bentley Hart would say that we're all begotten of the Father?
Yes.
Is that a simple way to say it?
Yes, we are all begotten of the Father, and for some reason a human soul, a human person is the unique sort of thing that can be a full a microcosm of the macrocosm. And when we achieve that perfectly, we are a vision into the whole, and that we kind of perfectly radiate out the true nature of all creation, or something like that.
And Jesus is unique in that
he did it first. Right.
He did it first, but also first in a sense of like, because this is where I like to bring in Father Bear, I think, because Jesus really is like, he's the first man. And in that sense, he's the second Adam. He is
Yeah.
perfected Adam.
Yep.
And so, like, in as much as we want to be human beings, we have to follow in his wake. And so that is his uniqueness, is he is behold the human being.
Mhm. Yes. And I really lean into that sort of first Adam, second Adam, that there is a very real sense in which Jesus is the first first human being, because he's the first spiritual human being, I guess you could say,
Right.
in his sort of, I like to think of it sort of his, in his crucifixion and resurrection together. It's like he's made perfect through suffering. It's like, when he finally makes it all the way to dying, right? That is his perfection. And because he gets perfected, he's like the sort of thing that can't stay dead or something like that. So it's like
He is the second Adam in that he had a life-giving forgiveness. Like,
yeah,
in
well,
that,
he became the second Adam,
yeah, a
became a
life-giving spirit.
life-giving spirit. The
Yeah.
weirdest verse in the whole New Testament.
I think
Weirdest
it makes
verse in the
perfect
whole.
sense in what we're talking about.
Yes, I think so. But I think that is the verse that I think needs to be meditated on the most to try and really understand, I think, Christology. Do you want to pull up
Yes.
this Ralph Waldo Emerson quote?
Yep.
All right. So this is he uses this in the introduction of his book. Every man is a divinity in disguise, a god playing the fool. Right. So every human being has this sort of latent divine potential. And this is another point that David Bentley Hart spends a lot of time talking about in this book, but even more in some of his other previous books. Like I won't be able to attribute the title to them, I forget, but that humanity must in some sense be divine already, in at least in terms of potential, if we are to be the sort of thing that can become, God by participation. Because you can't become something that is foreign to your own potential as a
Deep
person.
calls to deep. Yeah, absolutely.
Because if you, and like we sort of use this analogy, like a caterpillar can become a butterfly because it's within the natural capacity of a caterpillar to become a butterfly, but a caterpillar can't become a Ferrari without being smashed on the windshield, because a caterpillar does not have the natural potential to become a Ferrari without being annihilated. And so if we are to truly become, sons of God or fully divinized human beings, then, or spiritual people, then it must be within our capacity to,
Within our nature, is that the
within our
classic sense of that
natural,
word?
yes,
Yeah.
within our nature, within our natural capacity to become such, or else it would destroy us to make us into something that we can't become.
So that's what it means to be made in the image of God, as an icon of God, is it is within your nature to become gods. We are gods. That's his book. There you go.
Yes, you are gods. Yes, I think it was in the book You Are Gods, right? Isn't that one of his books?
That's
You
one of
Are
his,
Gods,
newer ones.
or maybe an essay or something like that. Yeah, so I think it was in that book. All right, and then the second Ralph Waldo Emerson quote, I think this is actually David Bentley Hart's Christology. Jesus Christ saw with open eye the mystery of the soul, drawn by its severe harmony, ravished with its beauty. I mean, the transcendentalists like doing these sorts of, I would say, so these flowery, boundary
Poetic
push.
riffs.
Yeah, all right. Ravished with its beauty, he lived in it and had his being there. Alone in all history, he estimated the greatness of man. One man was true to what is in you and me. He saw that God incarnates himself in man and evermore goes forth anew to take possession of his world. He said, in this jubilee of sublime emotion, I am divine. Through me, God acts, through me speaks. Would you see God, see me, or see thee when thou also thinkest as I now think? But what a distortion did his doctrine and memory suffer in the same, in the next, and in the following ages. And that's that sort of Christianity immediately got off track, but I, Ralph Waldo Emerson, have restored, Christianity to its original teaching. But this idea, right, that all man has this potential. Jesus is unique and first to see this divine potential and fully understand
Right.
what it means. inside the human being, and then lean into it. And this sort of like perspectival realization, or whatever you would want to call that, is sort of Jesus's apotheosis. And as Jesus becomes divine, God himself becomes a person inside the show, because man has leaned into what it's supposed to be. And then, you know, if you want to see God, see me. And Jesus does say things like that, right? He who has seen me has seen the Father, right? You know, the disciples ask him, you know, just show us the Father. It would be enough for us if you just showed us the Father. Have you been with me so long? And have I not told you, he who has seen me has seen the Father, right? So basically, seeing Jesus is seeing God. But you could also see God if you thought the way that I now think, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Good
and
point.
I think that's it. That's David Bentley Hart's Christology right there. It's just in Ralph Waldo Emerson, the radical Unitarian. Not.
So what in that do you disagree with?
Oh, I don't know exactly. And so I see Nate is saying I disagree with Sam here because of DBH's emphasis on kenosis, and I think that I would agree about the importance of kenosis, or self-emptying.
I don't get what Nate is saying. Like, you don't affirm kenosis?
I think he's saying that what I'm saying that David Bentley Hart thinks doesn't have enough kenosis in it. I think that's what Nate is saying. I'm not. I
Because
have
of
a lot.
Emerson, it's just like thinking.
It's just like this self-realization of how
Yeah.
of your own inner divinity, and
that's where I would push back on being labeled a transcendentalist. I'm like, no, I'm a radical incarnationalist. Like, that's what I think belief means, is doing it. Actually forgiving other people. If you do not forgive others their sins, you will not be forgiven your sins. If you don't actually forgive people, which is one of my big arguments for Christian universalism, we are called to be like God, right? And he tells us to forgive our enemies. Do we think God doesn't do that? And then what does it mean to actually be forgiven?
Well, you see, David Bentley Hart would agree with that, although he
Of course he
doesn't.
would.
He doesn't always seem very good at forgiving his enemies.
Right. But that's where, that's where me and David are consistent.
Yeah.
Even if not in practice, perhaps all the time.
Right. And to me, I think that to the extent that Jesus is the revelation of God, it is through his self-emptying and his saying, not my will, but your will. And by his voluntary, it's like you become most powerful when you relinquish yourself of your own power. You become, most like the highest when you make yourself the lowest. He who exalts himself will be humiliated, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. First shall be last, last shall be first, all of that sort of stuff. And but I don't get the strongest flavor of that in DBH, if I'm honest.
The forgiveness?
the kenosis, the theosis by kenosis stuff.
Well, and I mean, I don't know. That would be a really interesting question. I put the link out, by the way, too. That
Sure.
I think that would be a really interesting question for him, because that's a lot of, that comes up like when I've had Jordan Wood on before, or when because people will say that of him, is like, it seems like when he's having conversations with other people, it feels a lot more Philonikeia than Philosophia. And so, like, in your intellectual conversations with others, are you doing it? And even back to Gavin Ortlund, that's my thing. Are you playing a zero-sum thing where you are, in a colonialist way, trying to convert people to your ideas and equating that with holiness and being right, when we would propositionally say the Christian way is forgiveness of enemies and kenosis? So, like, you can't be that self-righteous, browbeating conversionist, because, like, that's not the way. That doesn't mean that you don't strongly, this is the tension with Jesus, though. That doesn't mean you don't strongly profess your things. Like, Jesus said intense stuff to people.
Yeah. And what the question that I still don't understand, and that I asked him this twice in the conversation and I didn't get an answer, is why Jesus? Right. And this is the thing that I feel like David Bentley Hart does not have a very satisfactory answer for, is why is Jesus this first one? Why is he the special one? And like, I think that Ralph Waldo Emerson would just say, I don't know, he just did it first. You know, someone's got to be first, and Jesus was first, and so we should admire the one who was first. Why do you need a special explanation? It was bound to be someone. And I think that David Bentley Hart doesn't have a good answer for why Jesus is first, and that I'll try and wrap this train of thought up because I want to give Nate and Jess space. But I think in traditional, Orthodox Christianity, Jesus is categorically different than someone who achieves theosis, right? Jesus doesn't achieve theosis. He's sort of divine by brute, incarnational fact from the beginning. And then humans are then inspired and enabled and empowered and engraced by that example and Jesus's power to move in that direction afterwards. And like Mary or someone might be the example of the first person who achieved theosis. But Jesus, it's categorically wrong to say he achieved theosis. Whereas in DBH's land, I think that he thinks that Jesus became God, not just was some sort of brute force incarnation, because he does not like brute force incarnations. But then the question is, why is he first? And I just don't feel like he resolves that question or that tension very well.
One super quick thing before Nate and Jeff come in is that the nature grace distinction in like Catholic theology is Jesus was that by nature, we're that by grace, which I don't even know and that just seems like words.
I mean, DBH. I mean, this is the thing. This is like a big difference. I mean, at the core, just the core disagreement between Jordan Daniel Wood and DBH is that the thing that unites Jesus's divinity and humanity for Jordan Daniel Wood is his hypostasis. It's his person itself, and so he is able to maintain a distinction between the divine nature and human nature. What David is saying is that there's no difference at the level of nature, that our nature is the same as the divine nature.
Yes.
Which does make the particularity of Jesus seem arbitrary.
Yes.
I think like
Nate is exactly right. 100%.
His allergy to any, I don't know. It's funny because there are places where David has written some of the best lines about personhood that you can find in writing anywhere in the English language. In Doors of the Sea, for example, he writes about personhood beautifully, but somehow when he comes to his metaphysics, he just like has to extract it out, and it will never play any part in his metaphysics. And yeah, I think that's where he goes wrong. Although he's brilliant, I will say this about like David temperamentally, he's a more generous soul than people give him credit for. Like one of the things I was saying in the comments is that I don't like, other than Paul Vanderklay, there's nobody who will just randomly talk to randos at length the way that David does. He's very generous. People who engage with him in good faith, he will engage with in good faith. And he certainly has a certain kind of irascible kind of temperament to be sure, but at another layer, there is a generosity of spirit that people underestimate there. And he's said only nice things about me, so I don't.
He's never said anything nice about me.
I will say, in all of my personal interactions with him to make this interview happen, he was very nice. And when the camera was off, he was very friendly. Yeah. I just think he's like 99th percentile disagreeable.
I think so. He's sit great in the corner. Nate,
and I think he's definitely on the spectrum for sure. He's definitely on the spectrum.
Nate, can you repeat one more time, just because I want to hear it again, and I think everyone else would benefit from hearing it, where you think David gets wrong, goes off with the person thing, where he misses it, where he's a little off?
I think personhood is deeper than, I think he's too focused on being, on the category of being. And I think that personhood is actually, personhood itself, the experience of personhood itself, when we really think about the paradoxes that happen in our experience of personhood, that personhood itself is beyond being. Because we have no, like as human beings, we have no experience of the real that is not mediated through our personhood. So at least from a standpoint of like the human perspective, they're like our personhood is beyond being for us, because we don't exist in we don't exist and never will exist in any other mode.
Right. Well, it kind of is both. It includes being, non-being, all of that stuff, which probably
And if
brings
we
in-
are the image bearers of God, then it seems only rational to presume that same kind that something like our personhood exists in God as well.
So do you think he's more philosophical than like phenomenological,
He's allergic to
incarnational?
he's allergic to any kind of personhood in God, and I think that's because he fundamentally doesn't seem to be able to distinguish between ego and person. Like, I think he's afraid of, like, that if he talks about person, somehow people will think he's talking about a psychological ego. I think he's right to be allergic to
Right.
attributing psychological ego to the divine. But
Yes.
personhood isn't just psychological ego.
No.
It's more than that.
Right. Yeah, it includes that, because that's what I talk about with like egoic intellect or just merely propositional knowing or whatever.
No,
like,
it doesn't
that's an
even.
aspect.
It doesn't necessarily. Actually, if I'm to make sense of the idea that Christ has no gnomic will, which my libertarian tendencies make me kind of allergic to that.
Mhm.
But if I were to try to steelman that, the way I would go about steelmanning that is by understanding that there's something that isn't like ego. Like, there's something like gnomic will seems to be fundamental to the ego. So it is possible to be a person without having any ego, right? That's, I think, when we're talking about the language of kenosis, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
We're talking about personhood that has let go of ego entirely. And that is, it is a purely it is personhood in its purely relational expression, which I think is synonymous with love ultimately.
Yeah, you're not choosing your being. You just are-ing.
Right, exactly
everywhere.
right. And so I think I might have just convinced myself that I'm wrong.
And it's like in that
Come
ego,
on in. The water's fine.
and that the strange, maybe this is a real paradox, is that the strange thing is that when you empty yourself of that ego and you finally, relinquish it, that's when your own individuality is actually strongest, not weakest.
Exactly right.
Yes.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because it's I thou, it's othering, it's connected, it's you're not the isolated, autonomous, dead individual of like the selfishness that annihilates.
I will say this, but David's absolute like rigid monism is actually really good, because he's like, you can rely on him to be consistent. It, like, even though I ultimately don't agree with them, I think he comes to it through a good impulse, because we really do want to avoid duality. But the only thing is like, I think there is an option on the table other than monism or some kind of duality. And I think that's what Ian McGilchrist's language about the non-duality that also contains duality.
Yes.
Which I think is a very kind of Trinitarian kind of framing. I think something like that is like, so basically I don't have, obviously you can tell by the way I'm talking that I don't have the same allergy to Hegel that he does. Like, I think there's something to be said for synthesis. And I actually really do think that synthesis is Holy Spirit work.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of his things that he doesn't like about Jordan Daniel Wood is he's he's in a constant battle against Hegel, and any friend of Hegel is an enemy that needs to be annihilated.
Right.
All right. What do you guys think? I want to hear what Michael and Jess have to say. What do you guys think about this comment though? God's self-perception is Christ.
Sounds kind of reasonable. I don't know.
That was good.
Sure. Whatever. See, and this is why, here, back to Gavin Ortlund. Gavin, if you watch this is why the TLC is better than whatever the shit is you're doing. We're just hanging out. We're just talking about stuff. We're just friends.
He won't have watched this far. But you can tag him. If you tag him, he might watch it. If you tag him, he might watch it.
I'll add the tag.
I'll say this. Here's what I'll say for it. Here's the thing. It's like, well, I mean, look at what I just said. Like, I've had my allergy to the idea that Christ has no gnomic will is long-standing and well-established, right? And it's like, here I am. And it's like, when you're able to engage in honest conversation where you can trust that everyone in the conversation is really more interested in finding truth and proving that they're right, then that opens up possibilities that would not otherwise be there. And so I think you're just cheating yourself if you can't find a place for that in your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yep.
So it has to do with the Hegel stuff you brought up, but it more has to do with the relationship between the infinite and the finite that he was talking about. And for me, like that is like a sort of a foundational aspect of how I think about all this metaphysical stuff. That's sort of like the bedrock is this. There's the infinite, there's the finite, and the relationship between them. And I didn't understand what he was saying when he was talking about how I didn't know. First of all, I didn't know exactly what he thought, how he conceptualized that. And then I also don't know what he meant when he was saying that somehow that was lost. Like it was sort of constructed, and that whole section was interesting to me, but I didn't even kind of understand what he was saying. I wonder, Sam, if you could shed any light on that.
I think, like in his book, what's All Things Are Made of Gods, which is his more recent book, which is like the dialogue of the Greek gods, where they're trying to sort of discuss the nature of mind. I think that there's a little bit more of an answer to that question. I think that he that DBH believes that all thinking is some sort of stretch between the finite and the infinite as such, or something like that. That our minds, because yes, we're finite creatures, and in a certain sense, we're thinking in finite ways, but like concept, truth, logos, and consciousness are something that's like infinite. And so every time we think and every time we talk, there's some transjective act of going on between the finite and the infinite, or something like that. And that's sort of his answer to what mind is. And I think that it's sort of also related to kind of like the analogy that I gave at the beginning, like we're in the tunnel and we're going through the tunnel, but there's the light at the end of the tunnel, which is infinite, right? And so we're finite while we're going through the tunnel, but we're getting to the infinite at the end of the tunnel. I don't know. It's something like that.
What did he mean when he was talking about how Hegel conceptualized that wrong?
I defer all Hegel questions to Nate, because I am just not a Hegel expert.
Well,
yeah.
Well,
I know Maximus and Jordan Daniel better than I know Hegel.
I do not know Hegel well at all.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about Hegel, but I just found it interesting. Well, he said that basically there was a loss of this conception where the finite infinite was backgrounded, and then it was brought back with Hegel. But Hegel then, the way he was trying to synthesize those things, basically, he said it was something like a monumental flaw, a logical flaw, or
I think what he said is that for and this is like, I think how he framed what Hegel said about the relationship with the finite and the infinite is that like that the finite is like a mode of the infinite, essentially.
yeah.
And I don't think he did. I don't think he did anything to define the infinite in any way that's more clear. Because, like, we'll look at the term infinite. Like, it means not finite. We have no positive definition of the infinite available to us, and David hasn't done a better job than anybody else. So he just doesn't like what Hegel does. But what Hegel does doesn't make things any worse than what, because David leaves us with no understanding of it whatsoever.
But this is the thing: is you can't encapsulate a transcendental. I mean, it's impossible by its very nature. You can't do that. But I think I don't know Hegel either. But what I would say is that I think what's going on. The one Hegel quote I know is from Kelley, and it's like, to know the limit as the limit is to already be beyond the limit. Like, if you can see the limit, and if you even know something is the limit, you are inherently outside of that.
Haven't you absorbed a bunch of Hegel or Peter Rollins?
Peter Rollins talks a lot about Hegel and is influenced a lot by Hegel. But I would say, like, this is the weird back to the Taurus thing that I was talking about, is to be made in the image of God. Our finitude includes infinity, and that's why I think David was saying is that it's not really a paradox, because
right. I agree that it's not a paradox. Here's what I would say about paradox and synthesis. And regardless, like, I don't really care about Hegel, to be honest with you. But all I'll say about this, I believe in the possibility of synthesis beyond paradox, because I think that most paradoxes are a product of the limitations of language itself. Like we cannot with our language create the perfect model of the real. So we always end up in these paradoxes. And I think I have this strong intuition lately that our paradoxes. Paul mentioned something about this in the comments where he wanted to clip where I was talking about this earlier with you, Luke. But there's a way in which our paradoxes are a result of the way our language is inherently temporally bounded. Right, regardless of our intentions, it's like it's bound, like it's both. Our language is always spatially and temporarily bounded. So if we're trying to talk about something that is not spatially or temporally bounded, we're going to end up with paradoxes because we are dealing with something that is beyond the limitations that are inherent to our language. That doesn't mean that there is not some level at which that paradox is resolved. I would say that level is probably not at the propositional layer, because the propositional layer is confined to language. So that's where participation, I would say, is the mode in which we can get beyond the paradox by just participating with the real as we encounter it.
Well, Nate, and one add into that, and I don't want to hear Sherry and PVK because they just came in, but like this is language is information or static or definitional, which none of it is, and that's why we know sola scriptura is dumb, or church as a mere stated authority propositionally is dumb. It doesn't work, because if you go into it, because information does not give you meaning, so that's never been what language is. The finitude of language as encapsulable, controllable, understandable thing is a torus. If you go into it enough, it infinitely opens up.
Yeah,
Like,
well, I would say
like that.
Like this is what I encountered in Job, is there would be two things that would seem to be paradoxical, but
Yes.
but by putting them into this logical paradox or some other type of paradox, it actually does something in you that is beneficial, or it works on you. And so, but without putting those things in tension, there's nothing to work on you. You just either have this one or that one, and you make a choice or whatever. But by holding them in the tension, then it does this thing. And so I think, like, that's the purpose of a paradox. I think the biggest and most important paradoxes are transformational for you. So they're not exactly like illusions, and they're not exactly well, I don't know.
So my thoughts were, I've always been frustrated with kind of the dogmatic approach to, like, Trinitarian orthodoxy and stuff like that, in the sense that, like, it's really hard for people to ever even discuss some of this stuff without, crossing some boundary or whatever, which is more or less just results in people being like don't talk about it, barely think about it, because you're always doing like modalism or partialism or something. But when I just think about like the way you sort of create like anything, there's kind of, and this is separate from the way that God creates, that's the unique example that we can't fathom. But in the way that we are made to understand, you kind of have to, like, you can't help but imagine, I guess, the possibilities, or like working through it. You have to like work through it. So, and that's our role in this whole thing. Like, we're living in it. Like we're like living in the prototype of a thing that God was able to imagine and create, like, all at once. So that whole like temporal aspect doesn't really exist for him in the same way that we experience it. But I do think that eternal aspect of Christ, like, as whatever like the concept of sonship is, and I think maybe the Trinity probably is too limited in some sense, if you realize that ultimately it's contains all of creation. And I think even been thinking about that in the aspect of like Sophia, and that the bride of Christ, if the bride of Christ is Christ's bride, then the bride is one flesh. So the bride is already there before like all the other stuff gets created. And this probably goes with what Jordan Wood and JD Lionheart were talking about. Sorry, Nate, Luke and Sam, you weren't there. But
you'll get to see it soon. It'll be out soon.
Yeah, but just talking about, it's like, okay, the resurrection, that was the thing that allowed for death, for like Christ's death and for our own death, which and also sort of allows for our creation in some sense. Like, so like, and this is like something that's like I couldn't explain how this works, but even thinking about just the fact that life is like multicellular, and that cells divide and create more cells. Like, I think that may have begun for all of creation in the first division of that cell, like in Mary's womb. And like, that's the thing that sets the pattern that our bodies already understand. And like, our brains just haven't kind of wrapped themselves around in a bit. The death and resurrection that like perpetuates life.
I like a lot of that, Michael. I would say that, yeah, I agree. You need Ian McGilchrist speaks about that really well, again, in the plug for the Karen talk with him and Chris Green, which is excellent. I had to stop. I was shoveling yesterday when I was listening to it, and I was like, I just had to turn on a different podcast, because I was like, it's like one of those books where you just want to highlight, and I want to leave comments, and I'm just like, I'm highlighting the whole book. Like, I just leave a timestamp of like every minute of the profound thing they were saying. But McGilchrist says that, like, there aren't opposites. And this is stuff, we've spoken about forever on Grail Country. By the way, I thought David Bentley Hart, when he was just like, he's talking about like Bulgakov and Soliev and all these people. And I'm like, this is just basically an endorsement for all the things Grail Country's been talking about since the beginning of the corner.
Well, David is a profound influence on me, and I think he's for no doubt about that. So I think a lot of my interest in those things I picked up from reading David first, to give credit where credit is due. So I think I'm closer to Jordan's position in the disagreement between them, though. But I still have the utmost respect for David. And I think Jordan is right in Jordan's instinct that there is a deeper agreement between the two of them, like beneath this disagreement, I think is correct. And I'm looking forward to Sam and I getting them together and helping to make that happen. I really think we can.
That would be great.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, I think we can make it happen.
Are we going to have to wait for them to blog, to like write Substack back and forth?
Jordan wants to do a written response before he engages directly with David. Yeah,
that seems like a constructive thing to do.
I agree.
To organize your thoughts.
Correct, especially when you're getting ready to like enter into a serious discussion with someone as titanic as David Bentley Hart. You gotta want to have your ducks in a row.
Right. I mean,
David's intellect is astounding.
I made almost 6 hours of video about David Bentley Hart's book before I talked with him. I don't write things. I don't like writing. I like talking. But yeah.
The one other thing I wanted to throw in there, though, is just, I was very turned off initially by David Bentley Hart, mostly because of like his fanboys, I guess, more than I had actually interacted with him. But that one article that everybody else I really hated about like his personal devotional life was incredibly helpful for me, and it made me relate to him a lot more, understand him a lot more, and it was also really helpful in the time when my wife and I were going through miscarriage. It really helped me a lot. So just wanted to throw that out there.
I mean, I think that David Bentley Hart's personal spiritual life and his theology are not completely unrelated. And I think that one of perhaps the weaknesses of Hart's theology is that it doesn't have a lot of room for church.
It's like my church is baseball.
Because people in church treat you like crap. That's why.
Yeah. or you,
especially when you're on the autism spectrum and way smarter than everybody.
When you're smarter than all of them.
So that's related. I think this came up in a live stream recently where people were giving me grief because a big reason I left Protestantism is I was unable to have the conversations. And I said, now I just largely don't talk about theology in church. And they're like, you'd probably run into the same problems if you tried to talk about theology with all the Orthodox people. And I'm like, yeah, it's probably true.
Yeah,
I just don't talk about it anymore.
I will say this: David has been very clear that although he has a natural, like, temperamental dislike of church, he still goes.
Although it sounded like in that essay, it sounded like he didn't go very often.
Yeah, he's clarified that he still goes. He was just being honest about his reaction to.
But I don't want
being
to.
in church.
I don't
Right, exactly.
Go.
But he goes anyway, which is a positive.
All right. That's
to be honest about the fact that you don't want to go, but you still show up. Kudos to you, David.
Yeah. Okay. I got the impression from that he really only goes like if his brother manages to drag him along or something like that.
Isn't that a Hegelian way to live your life?
One brother is an Anglican clergyman. The other brother is now Orthodox too, but lives in Norway. So I don't think either of them are dragging him anywhere.
It's a very Hegelian thing to do.
So back to this. So Sam, where do you and I disagree about the Trinity?
Well, I mean, so I think Sherry left this comment in the live chat that like the answer to Jesus's uniqueness is the Theotokos. I think that was Sherry that said that. And I think that's my answer. I wouldn't use the phrase Theotokos, but basically, Mary and the virgin birth is, and that like God's intentional miraculous creation of Jesus is sort of my answer to that.
Can I riff on that a little bit? Because that's kind of why I jumped in. You don't get a firstborn without a bearer.
Yeah.
Right? So the Theotokos is the bearer, right? The God bearer. I'm just going to randomly throw out things that I think about all the time. Children are the world to come. Messiah dwells in the world to come. And then the other thing is, I threw out the thought experiment once. What would, or how many women did God ask to be the God bearer? Like, just as a thought experiment. I'm not saying I know anything about this, but how many women throughout linear time, because there's a difference between that and God's timing, were asked to do that. But it's not that they refused, because if they refused, we would have heard about it. They didn't hear him.
Yeah.
So that's a totally different scenario. So the Theotokos was a woman who heard God. That's like, she had to be in a place to do that, right? She had to be somewhere in order for that to happen. She heard him and she answered him and she bore Christ. And so he is described as the firstborn. And then the whole thing for me goes back to naturing and denaturing. This is how I think about the two natures of Christ, thanks to paganism. So, and Martin Shaw really helped me with this. So it's like, and I've used this example over and over. It's easy. It's the easiest one. Thor is not the god of thunder. Thor is thunder. So Thor is fully God and fully thunder. Okay? Just as Christ is fully God and fully man. And the Theotokos gives him that. That's her contribution to his nature, is his humanity, right? But
then the question is what did Mary do right that no woman had done before?
That's a moral question. That's a moral question. Like,
Listened.
I think we need to just set that over here for now,
Sure.
just for my sake.
Fair enough.
Because I'm going to piss everybody off if I get into it. But so when we question whether Thor was God or thunder, we've lost the thread. Okay?
Yeah.
Thor is both fully God and fully thunder. Like, this is just makes it so much easier to understand, I think.
That came from me before it came from Martin, by the way.
Oh, snap!
Oh,
Okay, well, kudos.
That understanding, that idea that thinking of the pagan deities as the god of such and such, is actually not right. That it's actually the god. So it's not that Thor is the god of thunder. He is the god of thunder. Like, the identity of Thor and the identity of thunder are not separate identities.
What I got from Martin was the idea. So he talked to me about the fact that he doesn't like archetypes. Because archetypes denature. And so what I'm actually talking about is denaturing, which I think is interesting language, because we talk about Christ's divinity, we talk about them as natures, right? And because of duality, when duality hits, let's say, when it enters the room, everything goes like this. It becomes denatured. So I think what David Bentley Hart is pointing out, and I didn't watch the conversation, but I've read his stuff, and he's talking about that. He's talking about the not denaturing something, and we all have that. We are all children of God, right? And that's what Jesus. That to me, that's what the good news is. Jesus says, "I have come to reveal the Father. If you have seen me, you have seen the Father." In other words, this is the good news. The good news is that we're all divine, right? Because we have this Father. Here's our Father. He's God. So we are fully God and we are fully man, I don't know if I'm doing a good job of this because I'm not a theologian.
Well, that's very much, I think Sherry's very much in agreement with Hart, in that divinity isn't this other second nature. It's just the fully realized potential of humanity. And Nate was saying that that Jordan Daniel Wood, and I think Nate, feel like that's sort of not full respect, or not quite the right way to think of the union of divine and humanity. It's just humanity being perfected. And I, like Luke asks, like, what is my actual contention? Like, the thing that bothers me really about traditional incarnation language is that it turns Jesus into not like a human who's doing human things, but as something just like an example. Like Gregory of Nyssa even will say this, that like when Jesus prays, he's not praying because he needs to pray, he's praying to teach us and show us to pray. When Jesus was tempted by the devil, he wasn't actually really tempted, he was just kind of doing it to show us the path through temptation or stuff like that. I'm like, no, that's what really gets my goat, is that no, Jesus prayed because he needed to pray. And like Jesus goes off into the wilderness for like sometimes days at a time for his own benefit because he needs to. And when Jesus is being tempted, he is struggling but winning the struggle. And that it takes sort of the drama and the human element, and I would also say the accomplishment out of it when you take away that element of Jesus's humanity.
So let me guess.
And that's what really bothers me, I think, about a lot of traditional Orthodox.
So I think, Sam, for you then, having just said what you just said, then I think you would find it, the idea that Jesus had no gnomic will, to be a denial of his
See,
Yeah,
that's
I would
that's
think
exactly where I was going to go. Like, I think Jesus was tested. It's like someone running a race. Like, it was hard. That's the difference between testing and tempting, how that Greek has both those words in it. But like, to run a race with endurance is hard. The passion is hard. It's very, very difficult. But I don't think Jesus was ever running the race and thinking, should I stop? I don't think he ever had that gnomic thought, like, should I give in? I think that's a
But
temptation.
what about Gethsemane, right? You know, please take this cup away from me, right?
But-
you
Not
know,
my
right?
will,
But
but
the
your
thought is there. The thought is there.
I think he
He's
doesn't
asking.
say if. He doesn't say please. He says if this cup could be taken. You know, it's like he knows it's not going to be, but if it could be, right? But I just want, Luke, could you highlight? There's a comment by Jeremy about the only begotten. I don't know. It's way up there now, I think.
I'll find it.
I just want to clarify what I'm saying, because yes, there is an only begotten. That is the same as firstborn, right? Only begotten is the same as firstborn, and then sons by adoption. Yeah. Yeah. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So, which to me is a description of a person. That's what a person is. A person is a way, a truth, and a life. But it's not a postmodern truth. It's not my truth, right? It is the truth. Like, I am becoming what I am becoming. I know I'm stepping on all kinds of boundaries
But
here.
this, the only begottenness, we said this earlier with like the genus, because David was saying that, like, we are the same genus as the Father. And so in that sense, I think what David would say is he's the only begotten, but then as we are theosified and accept Christ in me, we also become only begotten because we're in Christ.
So
Yeah,
Jeremy,
there's
you could
definitely
expand on that. I want to know what that only begotten is different than firstborn. I understand only begotten of the Father. Yes.
no, they're actually not technically different, I would say. They're actually two different ways of expressing the same thing.
That's what I think.
Theologically,
I would agree with that.
He also says he's the firstborn of all creation.
Yeah.
In other places. So it's.
Anybody want to tackle this one?
Where did he get all him chromosomes if Jesus only had a human mother? I don't know what Jesus's chromosomes is.
Where did Adam get all him chromosomes?
Yeah, I don't know where he got it.
Don't say
I
him.
don't know where he got him chromosomes.
This person mistyped. Don't make fun of their fat fingers.
I think Adam got his from Jesus. So I mean, I don't know.
There we go.
Where did Eve get all her chromosomes? Let's go there.
Yeah,
That's right. We have
From Jesus.
There's a lot of women in the room there.
Well,
we got 7 minutes.
yeah.
FYI.
Well, somewhere on my channel, I have videos where I talk about that aspect, that, Adam is like a male, with an X and a Y chromosome. He's got there's like a hiddenness of a motherhood within him. And I do think that probably comes from Jesus, who gets it from Mary, even though she comes after Eve. That's kind of the whole, like, God can do stuff that we can't, and
Well, I would say to that thing that Matt just said, the whole point of the virgin birth is the only begotten. Like, that's where they get the language for only begotten. It's a virgin birth, okay, and which is a paradox, right?
Well, but Christ is a paradox too, right? So that's one of the things that we're struggling with here, is that, like, there's a way in which, like, we're wanting to understand the way in which Christ relates to the particular and the universal. And it seems like Christ is both the most particular of all particularities and the most universal of all universals at the same time. And
So are all the people you know.
well, yeah. Right.
Well, they might not be the most.
We maybe don't know him well enough yet.
Well, that's the whole thing of everything really happens all at once, including like the creation of time, but we can only experience that stuff from within time. So like, you know, it's hard for us to understand, but I think on the other side of things, it all makes sense, you know.
Nate, what did you just say? Because I think I missed it, and everybody's like, "Yes."
Well, I was just pointing us back to that. We were going to, when we talk about Christ, we're inevitably going to end up in paradoxes.
Yeah.
And part of like what you just touched on, like I would like, as I've been saying a lot lately, my intuition is that our paradoxes are related to the way in which our language is inevitably both spatially and temporally bound. And so where we're trying to talk about things that are not spatially or temporally bound, we end up coming into paradoxes. But those paradoxes are only paradoxes at the level of language, because our language is insufficient to express the reality of what we're trying to express.
Right. And that's a very Neoplatonic and sort of apophatic point, right? That being is in a sense above logos or something like that.
But you don't have to read Plotinus to know that. Like, that's the thing, you know. I've never read him, but that's exactly right. You know, like if we believe what we believe about God, which, I mean, any pagan would tell you that the transcendent is above and beyond, right? Like, that's just awesome. That's just obvious. Like, you can't worship something that is you, right? You have to worship something that is greater than you so that it can help you.
One last thing, and then I got to get out of here. But I just wanted to say there was a point in the conversation where David was talking about the gap between the mythological language and the kind of like philosophical language. And I would say, in my opinion, because the mythological language is not attempting to resolve the paradoxes as much as the technical philosophical language, sometimes there's more truth in the mythological language than there is in the philosophical language when we're talking about these things.
I think there's always more truth in that. And I think actually that the mythological language does resolve it, because it usually marries, right? There's always there's a marriage somehow in myth and in story. So
I got to go to a work meeting. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
And that was one of the things I wanted to mention, and then I got to go too. But in the beginning, when you guys were talking about paradox, like when Jess asked this question, that's when it was. My thoughts went immediately to Adam and Eve. I mean, Adam and Eve are paradox, right? Man and woman are opposites, and yet they come together to create life, and that's what the synthesis, if you want to be Hegelian, of opposites does, is it creates new life. So, but anyway.
And when the two are one.
Yeah, I just wanted to sit
nice.
with you guys. Missed you, Luke, and Sam. Missed you. Oh, sorry, I never got to meet you yet.
I will meet sometime, Sherry.
Yeah, I hope so.
I hope so too.
Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks for coming,
Sherry.
Yeah.
All right. Final words, Sam.
Final word is, I think a big problem with David Bentley Hart's theology is the question of worship. Okay. And that because he doesn't think that there's really, in some sense, a God above, and that really the truest manifestation is only sort of this God within. And I said this in my moralistic therapeutic deism lectures, is that that's really one of the shifts that happens from the shift from first wave Unitarianism to second wave Unitarianism, which I blame on Ralph Waldo Emerson, is that when God is really only sort of a latent potential within humanity that's only ever realized within humanity, there really is nothing above that's being worshipped. And I think that another thing that I would say that bugs me about traditional Trinitarian incarnational orthodoxy is that Jesus worships God. Like when he's a man, he is worshiping God. And even in heaven, as our heavenly high priest, you know, Hebrews, blah, 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 Melchizedek, yada, yada, yada. He in heaven, his job in heaven is the high priest worshiping God. And that there is still this external pointing to the thing that's above you, that's God, and that Jesus perfectly embodies and exemplifies what it means to worship. And I think that that's really one of the biggest things that I think that traditional Trinitarianism and incarnational theology gets wrong. And David Bentley Hart also doesn't have a place for Jesus worshiping God, because it's just this Christ consciousness that I have, manifested and am sharing. And so I think that the question of worshiping that above you is not well answered in DBH's theology, or Emerson's for that matter.
Quick response to that, and then I'll let Michael have the last word. But what's hard about that, and this came up again in that other conversation I've been talking about a bunch with McGilchrist and Chris Green and stuff, is like heaven as a place. And like that's kind of that was the Paul Antleitner heaven, Rafe Kelley thing. Is like heaven isn't this like, and even in Revelation, the New Testament, it's like bringing heaven to earth. There isn't like a place where God is. God isn't an object. God doesn't have, and so like the God that's outside, I don't know how to conceive of that as God the Father in a place thing, because he's beyond all those categories, and where would he be above us? And even the cosmology of Jesus, when we're talking about these things, they didn't have this evangelical heaven. Like they weren't thinking that way either. They were thinking the heavens.
Yeah. But there's the heavenly tabernacle that Jesus goes into. Where exactly is that? What is that?
I don't know.
And I do think it comes down, right? The vision in Revelation is that heaven comes down to earth and God's dwelling is among men, and that this heavenly tabernacle where Jesus is now leading the perfect worship liturgy in the heavens and the perfect Holy of Holies comes down, and we get to be inside of it, not because we've been exalted to it, but because it has come down to us.
Isn't that the transfiguration? Like that's heaven.
It's a burst of it, maybe a burst of it, but not the final always of it. Yeah.
Right. Okay, Michael, close us out.
Well, I guess the thing I want to say is that I am thoroughly opposed to anything that keeps us from being able to wrestle with our thoughts on these things. I kind of think it's like, I don't know, maybe it's like a big psyop that for so many centuries, men that were not fathers were called fathers, and they were the ones that told us what it means to be a father and what God the Father is, and becoming a father really challenges a lot of my perception about that stuff, and I think that in Jesus, I think we can explore his humanity to like the fullest. I don't think we need to. I don't think he is offended by our doubts. The divinity within him is not offended by our suspicion of that, especially as it's been mediated to us by, all these other humans who transmit the truth imperfectly and fail to embody it in the right way. And so I think that if we wrestle with understanding that stuff, I think that he's gracious towards us, and that he is inviting us to explore that idea of what it means to be human, really, and that's maybe even more important than it is to think about his divinity.
All right, nice, well said. Thanks for coming, Sam. I think this
was great, Luke, and you all the good people came. Paul PVK even showed us wherever in the world he is for approximately 10 seconds. But
that's right. clip it, PVK. All right.
All sorts of clips in this one.
That's right.
All
okay.
Right. Thanks, Luke.
You guys. Yep.
Thanks, friend.
Bye. Thanks.